Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to stop, sigh, and just say, "What on earth is going on?" Life is full of absurd moments that make us question what we're seeing. From seemingly simple daily events to unexpected, quirky situations, each of us has probably experienced something like this at least once. And that's the kind of story Up Top wants to bring to you. Thank you for watching. It was supposed to be a normal run, just like any other. She set out for her daily exercise, enjoying the fresh air and the rhythmic beat of her footsteps against the pavement. But as she jogged down a quieter stretch of the road, a chill ran down her spine. She had noticed an SUV trailing slowly behind her, and her instincts immediately put her on alert. Trying not to panic, she pulled out her phone to text her sister, her fingers hurriedly tapping the screen in a message for help. But before she could hit send, the situation spiraled out of control. Without warning, someone leaped from the SUV, grabbing her forcefully. Adrenaline surged through her as she struggled against her captor, her heart racing as she tried to resist. In the chaos, she clawed desperately at the eyes of her attacker, hoping to break free. But her efforts were in vain. Overpowered, she was dragged into the vehicle, her wrists tightly bound and her mouth gagged to silence her cries for help. Inside the SUV, the terror only grew. She could hear her own frantic breathing through the cloth they'd used to cover her head, muffling her surroundings and adding to the disorientation. 3 masked figures held her down in the back seat, each one seemingly unfazed by her desperate attempts to free herself. She kicked, squirmed, and fought with every ounce of strength she had, but they were relentless. They pinned her down, binding her ankles to keep her still, and ordered her repeatedly to calm down. Yet calming down was impossible when all she could think about was the sheer horror of what was happening to her. She felt trapped, her mind racing with fear and the grim realization that she was at the mercy of these strangers. She couldn't see their faces or understand their intentions, and that unknown stretched before her like a dark chasm. Time slipped away in that endless moment of terror, and she found herself crying uncontrollably, pleading with her captors to release her, her voice a muffled sob through the gag. The intense fear gripped her so profoundly that her body gave in, her fear becoming palpable as she felt herself lose control. Finally, the vehicle came to a stop, and her heart pounded as she heard the doors open. She was roughly pulled from the car, her legs stumbling under her as they dragged her into an unknown location. When her legs and wrists were finally freed, and the gag was pulled from her mouth, she was told to stand. Weak and shaken, she obeyed, her mind still grappling with the shock of her ordeal. Through her tears and trembling body, she couldn't understand what was happening, fearing the worst. The men moved closer, ordering her to be still as they reached toward her head. Then, in one motion, they pulled the bag off her head, revealing her surroundings. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light, and it was then that she saw him, her boyfriend, Alex, down on one knee in front of her, a small box in his hands, containing an engagement ring. Behind him were balloons spelling out, "Will you marry me?" For a brief moment, her mind struggled to process the absurdity of what she was seeing. The terror of the last few minutes clashed with the scene before her, disbelief clouding over the shock. Her boyfriend looked at her with a grin, as if he had just pulled off the most elaborate, unforgettable proposal. Around him, the men who had taken part in the kidnapping were laughing, their expressions showing only pride in their twisted act. Her body remained frozen, heart still pounding, unable to reconcile the horror she had just endured with the sight of Alex's smiling face. Standing there in shock, the scene of her so-called proposal sinking in, she could hardly believe the twisted reality of what had just happened. She looked at Alex, still on one knee, his expression one of smug satisfaction, as if expecting her to be overwhelmed with joy. But her heart was heavy, and all she could feel was a mixture of confusion and betrayal. She could barely process what she had just endured, her mind flashing back to the terrifying moments in the SUV, the masked men tying her wrists and ankles, pinning her down as she cried and fought to free herself. Her body still trembled from the intensity of the fear she had felt, and she could still hear the harsh laughter echoing from the men who had dragged her into this nightmare. She felt sick, realizing this entire horrifying ordeal was all a prank, a proposal designed by the very person who was supposed to protect her. As she looked at Alex, struggling to understand how he could think any of this was okay, she felt her anger building. "Alex, what is this?" she managed to say, her voice barely steady as it wavered with emotion. He looked up at her, a proud grin on his face, as though he'd achieved something remarkable. "Surprise," he announced with a smug confidence. "I wanted it to be memorable." Her disbelief only deepened. Memorable? She had just been through one of the most frightening experiences of her life, her body still reeling from the adrenaline, her mind clouded with confusion. Her voice shook with a mix of rage and sorrow as she tried to make sense of his actions. She felt violated, her trust in him shattered into pieces. "Is this some kind of joke?" she whispered, her voice cracking, tears streaming down her face as the weight of his betrayal settled in. But Alex, seeming unfazed by her distress, replied with the same tone of misguided pride, "I thought you would love it. I wanted to make it unforgettable." She was stunned, unable to comprehend how he could view terrorizing her as some sort of romantic gesture. Her heart felt as though it were breaking, and her breath came in shallow gasps as she tried to hold back a sob. The men who had helped Alex still stood nearby, some of them chuckling, clearly entertained by the ordeal. She hated the sight of them, hated their laughter, hated that Alex had somehow convinced himself that this was the way to express his love. Feeling the weight of everything she had just been through, she looked down at the ring in his hand. She could see the beauty of the diamond, sparkling in the dim light, but it now represented something twisted. This wasn't a symbol of love, it was a reminder of the nightmare Alex had inflicted on her. The balloons, the decorations, the whole setting seemed grotesque, a mockery of the joyful moment it was supposed to be. She was torn between anger and sadness, unable to see any trace of understanding in Alex's eyes. "Did you even think about how I would feel?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, each word weighted with pain. The laughter from the men stopped, and the room fell silent, the reality of her reaction finally sinking in. For the first time, Alex's confident smile faded, and a shadow of doubt crossed his face. "I just wanted to surprise you," he stammered, his voice uncertain. But she could no longer contain her frustration, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Happiness doesn't come from fear, Alex. You scared me. You hurt me. How can you think this is love?" The silence around them felt heavy, as if the weight of her words had finally pierced through Alex's bravado. The joy he had hoped for was nowhere to be found. She watched as the masked men exchanged uneasy glances, their laughter and amusement replaced by an awkward discomfort. But as Alex tried to urge her to put on the ring, desperation creeping into his voice, she felt her resolve solidify. There was no joy here, no love in this twisted spectacle. After that harrowing night, Alex seemed to be in complete denial about the severity of what he had done. In his mind, he believed he could somehow win her back, convinced that a series of grand gestures would erase the memory of the trauma he'd inflicted. It wasn't long before his relentless attempts to gain her forgiveness began. Each day, it seemed as though he was concocting new ways to prove his supposed love for her, each more extravagant than the last. She would receive flowers delivered to her office, each one accompanied by notes detailing memories of their relationship and the reasons he loved her. But instead of feeling touched, she felt trapped, each bouquet a reminder of his misunderstanding of her pain and the fear she still carried. Her coworkers looked on with a mix of amusement and pity, not knowing the full story behind the flowers. For her, the constant deliveries were overwhelming, turning her workplace into an emotional minefield where she had to confront the unresolved memories of his betrayal daily. Things escalated when, one morning, a flash mob appeared outside her apartment window, singing and dancing to a love song as Alex led the group with a wide grin on his face. She looked on in disbelief, feeling a mix of embarrassment and frustration. While her neighbors cheered and took videos, she wanted nothing more than for it to stop. She felt cornered, with Alex putting on this spectacle as though it were a show for the world to see, disregarding her feelings entirely. When she turned away from the window, her heart pounded with a familiar fear, the sense that he was controlling the narrative, forcing her to react to his public displays rather than respecting her boundaries. To her, these gestures felt invasive rather than loving. Each act, no matter how well-intentioned, was a reminder of the nightmare he had caused. As days turned into weeks, Alex's attempts became more insistent. He would show up at places she frequented, her favorite cafe, the park where she ran, even her friends' gatherings. She felt as though she was constantly on guard, never truly able to escape his shadow. Some of her friends were divided. A few thought his efforts were sweet, seeing only the surface of his actions without understanding the deeper pain she carried. Others, like her best friend Lisa, urged her to stay firm, reminding her that she didn't owe him forgiveness simply because he was trying to apologize. "You deserve someone who respects you," Lisa would say, her voice steady with conviction. "Just because he's putting on a show doesn't mean he's changed." But as Alex's gestures grew larger, her internal conflict also deepened. Part of her still remembered the person she had once loved, a person who hadn't yet crossed that line into manipulation and fear. She found herself questioning if she was being too harsh, especially as friends of Alex began to reach out, pressuring her to give him another chance. "He's really sorry," one friend had texted her. "Maybe you should just talk to him one more time." The weight of their words began to chip away at her resolve, and she felt herself doubting her own feelings, questioning if she was somehow at fault for not being more forgiving. Her heart was torn between the memories of their past and the realization that the Alex she had loved was no longer the same person. In a moment of self-reflection, she decided to call her mother, hoping for some clarity. Her mother listened patiently, offering the simple but powerful advice to trust her instincts. "If it feels wrong, it probably is," her mother had said gently. "You have to make the decision that's right for you." Taking those words to heart, she resolved to stay true to herself, realizing that forgiveness didn't mean sacrificing her own peace and safety. The Alex who couldn't respect her boundaries wasn't the person she needed, and no amount of grand gestures could change that truth. If you find it interesting, please like it. If not, please comment number 1. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this video. In the weeks that followed her decision to break free from Alex's relentless attempts, she made a commitment to focus on herself, something she realized had been neglected amidst the turmoil. Initially, it was difficult. Every message or attempt by Alex to reconnect tugged at her heart, a reminder of both the good memories they once shared and the trauma he had caused. But she was determined to rebuild her life, one step at a time. She began by immersing herself in the things that brought her joy and peace, like running through her favorite park, feeling the rhythm of her feet on the trail as she focused on nothing but her own strength and freedom. Each run became a small victory, a reminder that she could rely on herself and move forward independently. She also found solace in spending time with friends and family, surrounding herself with people who supported her decision and understood the depth of her experience. Lisa remained her rock, always there with words of encouragement, and her mother's advice echoed in her heart, a guiding voice reminding her to trust her instincts. Slowly, she started to feel lighter, as though the weight of her experience was beginning to lift. She opened up to her family and close friends about what had happened, each conversation helping to release some of the hurt she had kept inside. She found comfort in their understanding, in knowing that she was not alone and that others recognized the strength it had taken to walk away. In time, she took up new hobbies as a way to heal, exploring activities that allowed her to channel her emotions creatively. One day, she stumbled upon an art class and decided to give it a try. Painting became a form of therapy, a quiet sanctuary where she could express the parts of herself that words couldn't quite capture. Each brushstroke allowed her to pour out the pain, frustration, and, gradually, the hope that was returning to her heart. She began to create pieces that reflected her journey, her fears, and her resilience, each one a testament to her inner strength. These moments in the studio became a place for self-discovery, where she could see herself clearly, free from the influence of her past. Then, one sunny afternoon at a local art exhibition, she met someone new. His name was Noah, and his warm, genuine smile struck her immediately. They began talking about art, sharing stories of their lives, and as the conversation unfolded, she felt a sense of calm and connection that she hadn't experienced in a long time. Noah was thoughtful, understanding, and most importantly, he listened. There were no grand gestures, no attempts to impress or overwhelm her. In his presence, she felt safe, a feeling that had been missing for so long. He, too, had experienced his own struggles, and their conversations gradually deepened, grounded in mutual respect and understanding. Over the weeks, they spent more time together, visiting galleries, attending events, and finding joy in the simplicity of each other's company. With Noah, she began to see love in a new light, as something built on respect, trust, and empathy rather than on extravagant displays or control. She found herself looking forward to their time together, enjoying the quiet steadiness he brought to her life. Her heart began to heal, and she grew more confident in her ability to define her own happiness. For the first time in months, she felt free from the shadow of her past, hopeful about the future, and deeply grateful for the strength that had carried her through. Through it all, she realized that this new chapter wasn't just about finding someone else, but about rediscovering herself. Her journey had transformed her, and she knew that, no matter where life took her, she would continue to carry the strength and self-respect she had found within. As time passed, she found herself growing stronger, the once overwhelming memories of Alex's actions becoming distant echoes. She had come to a place of peace, finding comfort in her new life, her growing friendships, and the steady presence of Noah. But closure still felt incomplete. Despite all of Alex's misguided attempts to reach her, she realized she had yet to confront him directly and bring a true end to that chapter of her life. So, when Alex reached out once more, this time with a message that felt sincere and introspective, she agreed to meet him, hoping it would finally allow her to move on fully. They met in a quiet cafe, the atmosphere calm yet heavy with unspoken words. She felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension, but she was ready. Alex looked different, a bit more subdued, the usual confidence in his expression replaced by a hint of humility and regret. As he began to speak, he shared how the months since their breakup had changed him, revealing that he had started therapy to understand himself better. "I realize now how much I hurt you," he said softly, his voice carrying a vulnerability she hadn't seen in him before. "I thought I could fix things by proving my love with these grand gestures, but I see now that it was just my way of controlling the situation. I never meant to hurt you, but I did." Listening to him, she felt a flicker of compassion, realizing that this was a person who was finally starting to understand the impact of his actions. For so long, she had carried the hurt and betrayal he had caused, wondering if he could ever truly understand the damage he'd done. But now, seeing him acknowledge it, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. "Thank you for saying that," she replied, her voice steady but soft. "It means a lot to hear you acknowledge what happened, but I need you to know that forgiveness doesn't mean we can go back. I've moved forward, and I want to keep moving forward." Alex's face fell, the hope he'd been holding onto visibly slipping away. But he nodded, understanding that this was the only closure they could have. "I just want you to find happiness," he said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of sadness and acceptance. "Even if it's without me." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words. It was a bittersweet moment, but it gave her the closure she had been seeking. They exchanged a few final words, and as they parted ways, she felt a sense of release, as if a lingering shadow had finally lifted. Walking away from that meeting, she felt a new kind of freedom. She knew she had truly let go of the pain, no longer defined by the hurt or by Alex's actions. Her heart felt lighter, and she looked forward to what lay ahead with renewed confidence. She returned to her life, to her art, to the people who had been there for her, feeling stronger and more grounded than ever. Her time with Noah continued to blossom, each day bringing new joy and a deeper connection. For the first time, she felt truly happy, unburdened by the past and excited for her future. As she reflected on the journey she had taken, from heartbreak and betrayal to self-discovery and love, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the strength she had found within herself. She had turned a painful experience into a foundation for growth, and in doing so, she had discovered a love for herself that was resilient and unwavering. Now, she was ready to embrace all the possibilities life had to offer, her heart open and free, knowing she would always carry with her the lessons of this journey. Thank you very much for listening to my story. Your concern and sharing are precious. Wish you always have good luck and happiness in life.